Hey, hello everybody, welcome back to another video on how to alter Magic the Gathering cards. Today we are turning this beautiful mountain into a full art mountain, and we're going to be using these brushes for to do this. And we've got this really old hairy brush that's going to come in handy later on. We got some water on the side to clean our brushes in. We've got our skewer so we can clean up the borders, the edges of the painting that we're doing. And I'm just going to blurt out a couple colors here. We got some whites, we got some rose, we got some red. We got some light blue, some dark blue, some yellows, some blacks, some bit of a marine green kind of color too. First things first, though, we're going to grab our sandpaper, and because we're painting over the entire card today, we're going to be sanding down basically every area that we want to paint on. So that includes this text box, that includes the mana symbol, that includes the borders on the side. I'm just going to fast forward some of these bits to speed up a little bit. Just a bit of sandpaper, and you don't want to, roughen it up too much so that the white from below the card shines through. Just a little scratches here and there is fine. Clean it up, get all the dust off, and then after that, it's pretty much ready to go and paint on. So we'll be grabbing one of our brushes, and I think what we're going to be starting off today is the sky. So I've got a flat brush right here. What I like to do with these flat brushes, they can cover a lot of ground pretty quick, and most of the time, these flat brushes, like we'll be starting out with a fairly large one, and then later on, as we get into more detail, we'll move on to smaller brushes. So we'll start off with a fairly large one. Just mixing up some blues right here, and a little bit of rose to go with it, because the sky, even though it looks blue, kind of has a violet or purplish hue to it. So that little touch of rose that I'm adding into there is really important to get the colors right. Now, because there's a gradient in this sky, it's actually quite tricky to match the colors all the way through. So I'll be experimenting with different shades throughout and just lining them up on the side of the card and just seeing at what point of the gradient my color that's on the brush right now matches. So I'm constantly adjusting and moving from darker to lighter on the card to see at what point I reach the point in the gradient of the sky where my color matches. Adding a little bit more blue, and I think I added maybe a tiny touch of black, but I'm not entirely sure. Here we go in and fill in the entire top part. A little bit of white and a tiny bit of yellow to mix the color for the bottom part of the sky. It's kind of like this gradient turning into like this rose hue, pinkish, orangey kind of hue. So that I want to throw in a little bit of yellow to get the color right. It's definitely a little bit on the blue side of things, what I'm putting on right now. So I'm mixing up a new color, a little bit of rose in there, a little bit of white, and some of the old color that was already on the brush. And we just tap in the sky. It's going to take a couple layers to actually cover up the border, so don't worry if you don't get the colors right on your first go. We can always come back in a second layer, which we need to do anyways to cover up the borders from shining through. And then we can be a little bit more accurate with the colors that we're putting on. Right now we're just looking to like maybe 60%, 70% match the color that's underneath, or match the color that's on the card itself. And we can always come back later. It's a bit fiddly, but I feel like I've done an okay job right here as a first layer to get the colors right. Bottom left is still a little bit iffy, but we'll come back to that at some later stage. Here I'm putting on the second layer at the top of the sky. And same thing, it's a similar color. It doesn't need to be like 100% accurate. Or just dropping it on to cover up the border that's underneath so that it doesn't shine through anymore. Clean the brush, because we're moving into some different colors now. So here, I cleaned the brush because we kind of don't want to have too much of the blue that's left on the brush from our previous like sky colors to be meddling with the bottom part of the sky, which is way more pink. Now blues are quite strong and they can take over anything. And on top of that, if you add yellow with your blues, it's going to turn out a little bit green. So I made sure I took all the or most of the blues off of the brush before I started mixing these colors, and I'm just putting the tiniest thing back in, and even that might actually already be too much. Blues are very strong. This looks alright though. Could still be do with a little bit more orangey hue. We'll get to that later. Right now I'm just tapping in this color to cover the entire border that's underneath, so nothing else shines through. Hey, it looks alright. Cool, so moving on to the other side, there's a lot of stuff happening on the other side. There's some orangey on fire looking clouds, then there's like darker parts towards the bottoms of these clouds, and then there's this purple hue that I'm trying to tap in right now. Overall, this card is not easy. It definitely can be a little bit fiddly, this one. So I'm trying to get all of these different gradients right. Using the rose, a little bit of red, tiny bit of black as well. And then way too late, I figured out that what we actually needed was, hey, there it is, this brown color that I haven't even put on the palette yet. And once we get that going, it's actually a lot more accurate. So it takes a couple tries to get the color right. Now usually, once you have it, you can use it for the entire thing. So I'm mixing all of these different shades of orange and pink and kind of like this yellowy hues that are in the clouds. And we're going to be using or needing a lot of layers to cover up the border, because all of these colors, the whites, the yellows, the reds, and they can be quite transparent. And that basically means that the border that's on the card is going to shine through underneath the paint, which means you have to put many layers on to actually cover everything. But as mentioned before, right now we're just looking for a base color. We can touch up a little bit more accurately later on as our second and third layers as we paint this card. Here we're moving in a little bit of a highlight color. Got some yellows, a little bit of reds, a little bit of the brighter yellow as well, and a little bit of white to tap in some of where these highlights are going to be. And they can be quite glowy. Just be wary not to cover too much into your shadow colors that you've put down before, which is what I've done. And now I got to go back and tap in some more of those shadow colors. You got to be kind of accurate at this point. Cool. For the first layer, that looks all right. I decided I could do with a little bit more of that, a little bit more vivid orange and a little bit more vivid yellow, so I'm just tapping that in real quick. Cool, so that's layer number one. Got to move into a little bit of a clean space here. My setup is really DIY. I literally do this on my kitchen table. But gets the job done, just takes a little bit of creativity. Here we're moving into a dark color. I took some brown, I took a little bit of blue, a little bit of black, but I still wanted to be like the main tone to be the brown, so don't add in too much blue and too much black. Even the black has a little bit of a blue hue to it, so don't put in too much of that either. And I'm just dropping in these shadowy colors that kind of match those rocks in the background, and I'm just going to pull those forwards to where I think this rock is leading to. Now you can turn this into any shape you want, just kind of imagining the lay of the land that's already kind of like suggested by the picture that we're trying to, like expand. And then doesn't really matter where it's going, as long as you think like, hey, this rock is going this way, that rock will be going that way. You're not fully set in stone on these positions either, pun intended. You can change it up later on. It will just mean that your card will be a little bit thicker with the paint, but that's okay. Doing the same for the grass. We'll be grabbing a bit more of this yellow, mixing it in with the same color that we had before. And just gently, maybe even sketching would probably be the right word. Like we're sketching out where we think the rocks are going to be and where we think the grass is going to be. And then we'll go on from there. Clean the brush. Now we're dipping into some yellows. Probably going to add a tiny smidge of blue to that as well. Some red. And basically we're trying to mix up the color. This grass, which is not entirely green. It's more like a, I don't know, like a yellowy, autumny kind of hue. So we're adding lots of red and lots of yellow. Just the tiniest bit of blue to make it look like green, but it's not actually green. Tiny bit more yellow, tiny bit more white for like a highlighty version of that same color. And just tapping in with this old sketchy brush, and just by tapping you kind of get a grassy pattern, a grassy texture. I mixed in a little bit of rose and a little bit of blue for these shadowy colors, and basically move in these shadowy colors to the bottom right of every of those grassy areas. I'm just going to leave that for now. There's still like some of the card shining through from underneath, but we'll get to the grass later. Now I've got my flat brush, and I'm just going to lay in some of these rock textures. So I've got some red, some browns, tiny smidge of blue maybe, a little bit of white, and I'm just making these very tiny horizontal strokes and diagonal strokes to lay in a couple of these rocks. I'm not really thinking too much about how big a rock is going to be or like where exactly this rock is going to lay. I'm just going to let the brush roll along the card, and whatever paint gets pulled off, well, that's where your rock's going to be. Put in a little bit more red just to give it a tiny bit of a different hue. I try to mix up the color a tiny little bit every time we've completed a full like horizontal sweep, because every time you mix up your color, that's what's going to make your rock textures look real. Because when you look at a rock in real life, there are all kinds of different shades and colors and things happening. So after every horizontal sweep, we mix up the color a tiny bit, and then we do it again. This time I put in a lot of black just to make a shadowy color. And just at the bottom of each like rock, what do you call it? Like a rock layer, I guess. Just at the bottom of those, we're dropping in this shadowy color. And at this point, it's fairly defined where the rocks are already going to be, so we can just follow that same lay of the land, that same pattern. Giving these rocks all these different tones to kind of make them come alive. Cool, what do we got here? We got, I think this is my fluffy brush again, mixing up this dark shadowy color, and I'm just gently tapping in this mix of yellow with a tiny bit of black and a tiny bit of red, and that is this shadowy color for the grass. And just by tapping this old fluffy hairy brush, we get this really nice grass texture that really matches the texture that's already on the card, so it's pretty easy to get this done. The further we get to the foreground, the darker this color is going to be, so I added in a little bit more black for these shadowy colors of the grass down here at the bottom. And you can see now that we've pretty much covered up almost all of the original card that's underneath. There's just a little bit shining through on the left. We'll get to that. Bouncing back to a lighter color to cover that part up. And I'm basically just swapping between these shadowy colors, still with the same old brush in the same old color pile, just adding lots of yellow to make it lighter, drop a layer in, and then we grab a lot of black, and then we make it like a shadowy color, drop a layer in, and then we grab the yellow again. So we're constantly like bouncing back and forth between these colors to make it look real. Here I'm just tapping in a bit of grass to kind of blend in with the rocks that we just put in, so there's like less separation between the two. Flat brush time. Dipping into a little bit of yellow, a little bit of red, a little bit of rose, I believe. And this is going to be our first like actual highlight layer of the rocks we put in earlier. And just with the chiseled edge of the brush, I'm tapping a tiny bit of highlight on top of each and every rock, just at the very top, at the very start of these rocks. Don't want to put in too much. But it's kind of like matching the colors that are in the original picture, like, the big pointy one in the background. I want to kind of give them the same kind of like glow, that same reddish, sunlit, that sunlit vibe. So just with the chiseled edge of that brush, we tap in just a tiny bit of highlight at the top of each rock. Makes them jump out a little bit. We'll be doing that a bunch more times. Here I smeared on a little bit much. Kind of works out in the end. And we're doing this with several layers, mixing up our color each time we go do it. Same thing as before. The more you mix up your colors, the more you change it up just slightly, the more realistic it'll look. So composition-wise, this is basically it. We'll be doing lots of touch-ups and stuff. But in terms of composition, I'm pretty happy with how this looks. It looks like you're kind of like drawn into those two pointy bits in the back. And there's like lots of depth from the rocks like swirling around towards us, which is what we've painted, which is really cool. Grab my hairy fluffy brush, dipping it into some yellows, some reds, and some whites and a tiny bit of blue to make it a little bit more of a greenish hue. Tapping in some highlights on this grassy bit. So the fluffier your brush, the more it'll look like grass. So grab the oldest, fluffiest brush you have, and we'll just layer them in. Bob Ross style. Happy little bushes. Boom. Really makes it set apart, makes it come alive, eh? All of these little bushes just catching just that little bit of sunlight. And kind of dropping in a couple of these here and there in between the rocks, kind of to indicate that, the grass and stuff, they're like growing in between these rocks, and they're like, like making their way through the cracks and stuff. Here I grabbed a very green, darkish color, put in a little bit of shadows. Might have been a little bit too much, but maybe we'll fix that later. Oh, here we go. This time, same thing as before, we're doing a sweep with a slightly different color. Just as we did with the rocks, but now we're going to do it with the grass. So I added in lots more orange, lots more reds, lots more yellows, and then just did a bit of a horizontal sweep, tapping in that color, and just makes it look as if the bushes themselves individually have different colors, which makes it look cool. Don't want to cover all of it, just here and there. Went back to my flat brush, got some dark shadowy colors, just separate these rocks a slightly bit more, as if there's cracks and things happening. Just gently tapping in the shadow color. Definitely don't want to overdo it. Might have already overdone it in that rock in the middle, but we'll fix that later, I think. Some extra reds. Makes this very dark red color. Kind of got a summery vibe to it. Summery shadows. Cool. Back into our highlight colors. Is orangey color. Kind of just trying to fix the contrast that I created before with putting in the really dark shadow colors in these rocks, and I'm just kind of like tapping them out, creating a little bit of depth. Like there's supposed to be like this gradient happening where everything that's in the foreground has higher contrast and everything in the background has lower contrast. So the closer things are, the higher the contrast. The further things are away from you, less contrast. So I'm just trying to correct that. Here we're dropping in with the kind of like this rocky color, a little bit of a purple hue, a couple rocks in the background to kind of right on top of where the border used to be, just to make it look like everything is blending in together. Some highlights on this bad boy. Make it roll off the card. And now it's touch-up time. So with our first layers done, we're revisiting the sky to create more of a gradient in there and match the colors a little bit more accurately. Get this glowy effect going on. And just gently tapping in a couple of these blues and whites with a very soft flat brush. And I'm adding in a little bit more water in the mixing of the color as well, just to make it easier to blend with the colors that we've already put in underneath before. And also, the more you kind of like liquefy your colors, the easier they are to get into a gradient without getting an unwanted texture in it. Something that's still a little bit iffy sometimes is that I leave my paints a little bit too rough. And then you get this texture, even though the colors are right, the texture doesn't match. But here I'm using a very soft flat brush, and I'm liquefying my paint quite a bit to make everything smooth and blendy. So I'm just touching up these lower part of these main clouds on the right. They took a lot more fiddling than I'd hoped for. Just all these gradients are very tight together and very hard to get right. So there's lots of layers on them, lots of blending, but it turns out all right in the end. Now we're taking this reddish, fluffy pink kind of color, and just with the corner of the brush, we're just going to drag in some of these cotton balls, adding a little bit of white and red as we go, make things a little bit brighter. And we're just continuing these cotton ball fluff things that are coming out from the main cloud. A little bit of white to highlight on the main cloud on the right. And with that, we're pretty much done with this one. Or at least the painting part. Here's our skewer. This is the time where we clean up the border. Luckily for us, there's only the text border this time around because we turned this into a full art one. What I've done is I've dipped this into a little bit of water. Used just my hand to take off any of the excess drops that might be lying around the the sides of the skewer. You don't want them to be dripping down onto your card, so make sure you take all the drops off. And then just with the tip, we're going to try to scrape off any of the excess paint that's along the edges. It's a bit tedious. Can take a while as well. And because the skewer is moist, it'll just like let the paint loose. If there's too much water on your card, grab some paper towel to dap it down. And then, just trying to get the border clean. Takes a little bit of fiddling, takes a little bit of practice, but should be alright in the end. Some dapping here and there if the card gets too wet. And with that done, it's time to put a signature on this one. So, hope you enjoyed the video and the commentary. Hope you had a good time seeing how these things are made, how I like to paint my altars. If you like the video, be sure to leave a like or subscribe to the channel for more. I don't always have the time to make these videos. They take a lot of time, but I'll try to make more in the future. I think I might do a video on an overgrown tomb soon. That should be fun. A border extension, so that should be cool. If you have any questions, shoot me a message, leave a comment. You know the thing. And thanks for watching. See you soon.